That is a wonderful question, and a great question to start with. So, of course, I'm going to say, kind of a cop-out answer to begin with. It depends on your project. So, essentially, what is super important to do before you start a research project is to come up with things called goals, like a research statement, a problem statement, and goals. And those goals will actually help you choose the methodology that you will be using during the research project. So to give a little bit of an example, I use a fictional company called Dog City a lot. Animal fan, and let's say at this company, we sell all things for dogs. So we want to understand a little bit more about how users are shopping on our website, or how they are interacting with our website and buying different merchandise from our website for their dogs. And that might also come down to, does this collar fit my dog, or something like that. So before you start the study, you want to come up with these types of goals. Like, we want to understand how people are interacting with the website. We want to understand the step-by-step people are going through when they're choosing a certain product. Those kinds of goals are evaluative goals. So when you're trying to understand how somebody is interacting with a website or an app or a platform, any sort of, it could even be a physical product. When you're trying to understand how people are using something, interacting with it, how they're going like step by step through the process on a product, that is evaluative research. So under the umbrella of evaluative research comes different methodologies such as usability testing. That's like the main evaluative research method. And so when you set these goals up in advance, you kind of see, okay, we're trying to evaluate something, right? And so we want to choose methods where we're watching people use the website and are evaluating how they're using it. So that's usability testing. It could be something like contextual inquiry as well, where you're actually just watching the person go through a process on your product. Another great evaluative research method is something like a survey, where you're asking them questions about how they're doing certain actions or how they're behaving on a website, or an app, of course. And also something like card sorting, let's say, where you're evaluating how something is structured or how people think something is structured. So if you're thinking about this like evaluation, that's when you know how to choose those evaluative research methods. And then there's kind of the other side of it, which is generative research, discovery research. And that is just almost like a basic understanding of humans. I will even put it at that high level. It's understanding the mental models of humans beyond a product. So in this case, Dog City doesn't matter. What matters is how people shop for their dogs in general, beyond Dog City, beyond any brand. Their mental models of how they think about, oh, I need dog food, or, oh, I need this toy for my dog, and understanding a very holistic view of how people are approaching this process. And that is generative research, which another name you might hear for generative research is discovery research. And that's when you're going to do things like one-on-one interviews. Those are like the bread and butter of generative research, as well as a contextual inquiry can also be a little bit of both. So that could also be generative research. You have things like mental model diagramming. That's huge for generative research. You have jobs to be done, which is a huge generative research methodology. So really the best thing that you can do is find out like what you're trying to do in the research project, and it kind of falls into like the evaluative side or the generative side. And then you pick a methodology based on that. There's this like really gray area of hybrid research, which is like a combination of both, where you do kind of like a one-on-one interview that's like generative and very high level, and then go into a usability test. But I would that takes about 90 to 120 minutes. So I would focus on one or the other first, and then as you get more comfortable doing them separately, you can kind of squash them together into one larger session. A huge part of being a user researcher, I feel like, is annoying people and begging them for your attention, um, which is sad but true. So whenever I go through a design sprint, or the developers go through their sprint and they use the research, I always follow up. I generally follow up with the product manager and the designer. I actually have bi-weekly meetings with each team that I'm on, the product manager and designer of the team. So we meet at once every 2 weeks to either follow up on the research that has been done, to see if there is anything else that needs to be done in terms of research. So any other usability tests. And just to be clear, you can also usability test a live product. So it doesn't only have to be a prototype. So say the sprint is over, the code is live, you can continue to test that as well. I would always say that before a project starts, you should set success metrics for whatever you're creating, and ways to monitor the success of the feature or the change after it has launched. So that way, when you are checking up on something, like say you change something in a checkout flow, change a payment method or change some sort of form on the checkout flow, think about what metrics you want to be tracking, such as conversion rate, let's say, so that when you do have that follow-up, you're like, hey, how's the conversion rate doing? And if it's up, that's fantastic. But if it's down, okay, let's go. Like, we need to do some follow-up research. So it kind of helps give you context if you set those metrics beforehand. But always check in. Always check in. It also helps to make sure that your research is being acted upon if you're checking in with your stakeholders often. And quite honestly, this is like a 30-minute, sometimes an hour-long meeting, but usually a 30-minute meeting with the designer and product manager, where it's just a very casual chat of like, hey, how are things going? Hey, how are the metrics? What's coming up? Try not to persuade them, because they aren't there to be persuaded. They're there to be understood. So I often think about business stakeholders, my boss, any internal stakeholders, they're also users. So you treat them exactly the way that you would treat users in a user research session. Because somebody says no, you don't just say, oh, well, okay, like, I don't know what to do. Instead, what I would actually recommend is asking them questions. So you can't really persuade somebody if you don't understand why they're pushing back on you. So if somebody says no, that's actually a great way to open up a conversation about why. So why is there pushback? Is it because of time, cost, resources, which are the main ones? Then what you can do is you say, okay, if it's time, I can show you that user research can be done in 1 week. If it's cost, something that I did with a very particularly difficult stakeholder is I calculated the number of hours that developers would put into coding something, and literally in euro value. And then what I did is I calculated how much time and how much money would be spent if we had to redo anything. And when that figure was put in front of the stakeholder, they were like, okay. And then what I did is I showed them, this is how much time would happen if the developers coded it with no research, and then we had to change something. And this is how much user research would cost. And then they see the difference in the cost, and that helps them a little bit. That's future based, so you would have to convince the stakeholder that the change would have to be made, but more often than not, you will find in a company that something has been developed and either not used by a user, so that's wasted money, or has been changed. So you can then retrospectively go back and say, hey, remember when we did this? Or even if it was before your time, remember when this happened? This is how much it costed us. Here's what it would cost again now, and here's the amount that it would cost user research. So if you understand why people are pushing back, you can cater your answer to quell their fears almost. And what that does is that one, makes them feel listened to, which is psychologically one of the most important things that we can do. And two, directly addresses something that they're concerned about, which then makes it harder for them to say no. So instead of like throwing things until they stick, like user research is great for this and this and this and this, first figure out why they're hesitant, and then speak to those reasons. There are plenty of reasons to do user research. So generally you can find a one-to-one of like, this person doesn't want to do it for this reason. Here's the solution. I've written also about the minimum viable research, which is how you get people involved, which is doing a very, very small and short study. And then what happens is just for one team. Hi. I'm cute. So doing it just for one team. And then what happens is other teams will see the benefit. So I highly recommend involving or finding a champion. I joined a company that had a difficult time, was having a difficult time with getting people involved in the research. But I had one stakeholder, one product manager who was like, let's do it. And so then we did like this small study and we put Post-its everywhere. And then other people started like wandering over because they totally had FOMO and wanted to see what was going on. And then they started getting into it. So if you can show even the smallest amount of value for one team, you can start to involve other stakeholders. User research is not science. We're dealing with human emotion and responses and biases and subconsciousness in general. And user research is not done in a controlled environment. We can try to control the environment by a usability lab, but really what we're actually trying to understand is how people operate in their natural habitat. So it's much more, if you're going to put science on it, it is a social science, similar to like anthropology, much more than a real science. But quite honestly, a lot of people, I mentor a lot of people in this field, and a lot of people struggle with the science part of it and how it's not really a science. So we have to kind of change our own mindset on that a little bit, in terms of understanding what user research is and how it can really help us. And what we don't want to do is put user research into this teeny tiny box of a science when it's really not what it is, because it will just end up disappointing everybody. So I separate user research from science, quite honestly. And so things like sample size, let's say, which is a very difficult thing to bring up really quickly, but sample size, for instance, like we're not quantitative, we're qualitative. Well, you can be quantitative, but I'm talking about qualitative data right now. It doesn't need to be quantified. We're talking about stories. We're not talking about numbers. So I think that it's really important not to try and force user research into a box of science. Like, it just simply is not science. And just, if we start to accept it for what it is, which is just trying to understand how people interact with products, trying to understand how people go through their day-to-day, then we have a much better understanding of how to leverage it in the best way. But again, that's my take on it. I know a lot of researchers who do feel like user research is a hard science. So I'm just speaking to how I have grappled with that in the past. I also come from a scientific background, so I understand this frustrations behind the limitations of user research. However, I kind of in the past few years have been like, okay, this is what it is. It might grow into something else later, but let's use it for what it's good for right now, which is empowering our teams to make the best decisions possible for our users. That's that generative research that I was talking about originally, which is the very overarching holistic research. Instead of thinking about how you provide value through an idea, product, or feature, I would encourage you to think about it through a different lens, which is, what is the problem that I'm solving? Because if you are solving a problem, a specific problem for a group of people, that means inherently you are providing them value through either whatever helps them solve that problem. So what that generative research does is it helps you uncover problems, and it helps you understand what the problems are, what the goals are that people are trying to achieve. And you ask them, hey, what's going on currently that is causing you frustration about what you're trying to achieve? So if I'm having a problem with buying clothing online that doesn't fit, I can talk you through all the reasons why it's a problem currently for me. And so then what happens is you say, that's a problem. I've heard this problem. Let's say things become a pattern after 5 in qualitative research. I've heard this same problem 5 times. Let's think about how to solve that, come up with a few different ideas, usability test it. So that way you're not trying to fit an idea and like prove value in an idea already. What you're trying to do is think about it in the other way, where you are solving a problem for a customer. Awesome. I love this question because I think that we should, as researchers, enable anybody to do user research. What I would do, so I train when I run my user research courses through my research academy. I am not just training user researchers. I'm training product managers, designers, market researchers, and then I have various other people in sales and customer care. So I would highly recommend coming up with a training program for a company. And so what I would recommend is, if you're interested in doing this, start small with something like usability testing. Usability testing is generally a lot more concrete and easy to teach than something like generative research, where you kind of ask one question, don't really have a script, and it's a little bit more vague and ambiguous. But I absolutely enable the most common are product managers and designers to do their own research. So at Zalando, I'm in charge of the training program there, and we train like almost every product manager and designer to do their own research, because that's how you scale research at a larger organization. But also 100% market researchers, customer care, sales, really anybody, account managers. Also, I had at one company, I had everybody, like every department doing user research at some point. So like I had during sales calls, the sales reps were asking like probing questions on pain points, same with account managers as well. 100%. This isn't a magical skill that we should keep to ourselves. This is definitely something we should share, because it makes the greater organization better. And that's what we're there for. So one way to get people super interested in doing their own research is if you say no to them and you tell them to do their own research, and that's the way that they're going to do it. That's how we quickly got people interested in it. Of course, that could be a double-edged sword, because then they can just say, fine, then we won't do it. So you have to be pretty careful with that one. It depends on the maturity of the user research maturity of the organization and the team. So something that we do in our trainings is that I've had product managers like come with me to shadow an interview. And then what I will say is, like, say during a study, we talked to 7 people. I will say, okay, great. So you're going to watch 3, and then the 4th one you're going to do. And that's it. Because if you have time to come with me, then that means you have time to conduct the actual research session. I know this sounds a little bit harsh, and I'm not trying to come off that way. I generally say things much nicer to actual like colleagues. Yeah. But just to be transparent and straightforward on here, yeah, I would definitely talk to them and be like, hey, like, I will have you shadow me a few times, and then I would like you to do 1 so that I can empower you to do this on your own next time. The thing is also, if the product managers, let's say, aren't interested in doing the research, try and find people who actually are. So for instance, designers tend to be more interested in doing user research. So definitely find your champions and find people who are also interested in doing this and have the time. But also that means that you have to take the time to understand what they're doing on their day-to-day and what is required of them on their day-to-day, because putting more work on people is generally not the way to go. So if they really, if there's something that they really can't do, you know, try and find some other people at the company who might be interested. But generally, that combination of having them shadow you and kind of putting them on the spot a little bit, and then saying no to their requests, but saying, here's how you can do it, is a good way to get that started. But again, you can't force people, unfortunately, to do these kinds of things. So yeah, that's kind of the advice that I would give. Also, once it starts to get traction, people start to get more interested throughout the entire company. So once one product manager is like, look what I can do, you know, or one designer is like, well, look what I can do. We can do our own research. Like, we're empowered to do this. Other people generally follow. So it kind of becomes a snowball effect. I've seen those pages, so I completely understand. The thing is that as human beings, we are not super into change. So I don't know, there was this study done where eBay changed one of their main colors, and people were like, what is this? And then they had to scale the entire thing back, and they changed it by like 10% or so every 2 weeks until it was like a full change. And that slow change, like they went from like white to yellow, and like they took like a few months to do it. Where they changed 10% every amount of weeks. So I would start with small changes in terms of that. So like smaller things that you can do to improve the page. Make sure that you're basing the improvements though off of actual research. So if you're just guessing that hey, these are the trends, that might not work with your user base. So again, make sure that you're doing the research to actually create those improvements. And then don't only measure one metric. So look at other metrics as well, like click-through rates and error rates as well. So if you have like a checkout flow that's getting a lot of errors, like think about that as well, because although the conversion rate might be higher on the old page, you might also be getting error rates on that old page that you could improve upon and then get an even higher rate. But take time with change. Don't just like throw it all at the user. Something that you can also do is like beta testing a few different versions of this at once, or A/B testing smaller changes. So if you put this on my desk, what I would do is do some research to figure out what those improvements might be based on our user base, come up with some different ideas, and then do some small A/B tests and do incremental changes over time. I know it's frustrating because we're like, come on, like people like new design, but people have a really, really hard time, again, depending on your user base, with change. So doing it slowly and really basing it off of the user research is important.